Hi, I'm Tyler Thurman with Tyler Thurman Coaching. I am a transformative coach and a teacher and practitioner of the three principles. And if you want to learn more about me or my work, please look me up at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com, and you'll find lots of other videos and articles just like this one. And feel free to play around. It's kind of my online playground, so have fun. And there's also information if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, and that's kind of my love and my passion is walking with people to help them better understand the human experience. So without further ado, let's get to today's business and this video, which is I'm going to be speaking about something I'm calling sleight of mind, which really is a fancy term to talk about the capacity for our mind to play tricks on us, for us to be deceived. You know, we see something, it's kind of the definition of an illusion, which is something that appears to be one thing and is actually something completely different. And it's incredibly significant to be able to know about sleight of mind and kind of the mental trickery, so that we can begin to look in the right direction instead of the misdirect, if you will. And we can begin to understand how the mind actually works, which is incredibly important when it comes to living a more wonderful life, living a more peaceful, joyful, loving, compassionate, forgiving existence, which I think is pretty safe to say we all would like that, right? So what is sleight of mind? It's a lot like sleight of hand, which, you know, sleight of hand artists are, you know, the common term is magician, right, or an illusionist, where they can do very seemingly complex illusions or tricks or magic, when really it can pretty much always be boiled down to a misdirect, right, where essentially they point you in one direction, so you kind of look over there and you're distracted, while they do, or they have an assistant do, something else behind the scenes, so that it makes it appear as if something is happening which isn't actually happening, like levitation, you know, or disappearing into thin air, that kind of thing. And so we all kind of know about sleight of hand, right? We know that we can be fooled into believing something that's not true. Essentially is what that is, right? It's like, oh, they levitated. No, they didn't. They essentially are manipulating some variables of perception and observation, right? And so while it looks like maybe they're violating the laws of physics, they aren't in actuality violating the laws of physics. They're just making it look like they are. And so it's an illusion. It's sleight of hand. It's something other than what it seems. And another sort of naturally occurring illusion that I think most people have experienced is a mirage, right? It's essentially an optical illusion where it looks like during a heat wave, or we're in the desert, you know, something like that. It looks like we're seeing water off in the distance, or sort of, you know, waves, when it's really just sand or pavement. But it's appearing to us as if it's water, and it really looks like it is. So, but the key is it's not actually water. It just looks like water. That's the nature of illusions, is it looks like one thing, it's something else. So those are a couple examples of how we can be tricked. We can be fooled into thinking we see something that's not actually the case. And given that capacity, we are actually being tricked almost 100% of the time about how our experience of life is getting created, where it's coming from, how it's made up. And so it's very important to know that we can be fooled. Otherwise, you're going to keep buying into the sleight of mind, right? You're going to buy into the illusion again and again and again. Unless and until you know, hey, I can be fooled. Maybe I'm being fooled here. So it's very difficult to even begin to question where our experience is coming from, how it's being created, until we know, hey, I can be fooled. So that's the first kind of key to this whole thing, is maybe it's possible our mind is playing tricks on us. So the truth of it is, our experience of life, our human experience, which is made up of, we label it in different ways: thoughts, feelings, values, beliefs, judgments, opinions, memories, all of that we can kind of lump into the human experience. And where that's taking place is 100% within a mind. So we are essentially minds, which means that we are not bodies and we are not brains. Our experience of life happens within the mind. So we are minds. Now, what is a mind? That is it's a tough thing to talk about, because it's non-spatial and non-temporal. It's not the brain, because the brain is part of the body. A mind is it's kind of a spiritual thing, right? We can't really talk about it with words, because words put it into categories that it doesn't fit into. But let's suffice it to say we exist beyond the world that we think we live in, the space-time reality that our body exists in. Our mind kind of exists beyond that, outside that. And our experience of life gets created within the mind via two more principles, which are thought and consciousness. So they're essentially, thought is the content of our experience. It makes up the specifics of our thought, our beliefs, our personal values, our judgments, our opinions, our memories. The building blocks of all of those things are thought. And then those kind of get brought to life via consciousness. And those are the three principles: mind, consciousness, and thought, which I talk about a lot in other works. So go check those out. But let's suffice it to say that's all taking place within a mind. So it's internal, but it's not in the body. It's within the mind. And that's an important distinction. Now, why the heck don't we know that? We don't know. Most people have little to no knowledge of the inner workings of the mind. And we certainly don't think that we're minds to begin with. We think we're bodies. Why don't we know it? Well, we don't know it because of sleight of mind. right? There's one big illusion that's taking place pretty much all the time. And we don't know it because that's how illusions work. They get us to look in a different direction so that we don't see what's actually going on behind the scenes. That's the whole point, is it's a misdirect. And if you don't know there's a big illusion happening, you're not even going to think to look for it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm pointing you towards it. Here it is. Go check it out. So what the function that makes this the mind illusory, or the human experience illusory, is projection. Right? The mind actually essentially acts as one big projector. All those principles together work as a projector, in fact. So think of it like a movie projector. So you're sitting in a movie theater, and you're watching what looks like a story and an entire world unfold before you up on this gigantic screen, out there, right, out up in front of you, when really the inner workings of that story and that world are actually back behind the scenes. You know, there's a movie projector, a film reel, and speakers that project the sound. And we don't see all that. What we see is the projected image, and we hear the projected sounds out in front of us, but they're really all taking place behind us. And we don't think about that very much when we're watching movies, but we kind of know that that's how it works, which allows us to actually not get too caught up in the movie itself, right? Because we kind of know in the back of our mind, it's not actually real. It's an illusion. It's a trick of the light, right? It's storytelling, made to appear real, but not actually real. And that's actually a beautiful analogy for the projection of the mind. Because if you think about it, the thought, the thinking that we have within our mind is like the film on the reel, right? It's the content, it's the pictures, it's the sounds. And our consciousness acts as the light that projects the film up onto the screen, right? And so it looks an awful lot like our experience of life has a lot to do with what's going on out in the world, which I talk about as just circumstances or logistics, right? There's other people out there. There's other bodies out there. There's current events. There's time that seems to flow. There's our bodies, which seem to be in space and time, and they move around, and they speak, and they act. They do things. They're involved in situations. They go to work. They come home. They interact with other bodies. There's a lot going on out there, right? But what we don't know is none of our internal experience gets created out there. There's no causal link between what happens out there and what happens in here. Right? There's a bit more of a causal link the other way around. Right? So if you think about the movie, the screen and the images on the screen aren't causing the film reel to turn and the light to project. It works the other way around, right? Or the speakers to project the sound. It works the other way, right? It only works one way, in other words. And it doesn't work the way that we think it works because of the nature of projection and the illusory nature of the human experience. So there's two things going on in essentially every moment. There's an internal experience getting created via mind, consciousness, and thought. And then there's current events. There's circumstances. There's situations. There's other people. And we think the outside causes the inside. When in reality, the internal is what influences behavior, right? Which influences the world. It only works one way. And it turns out it's really, really useful to have an understanding of how the mind works and how we are minds. And to know about the big illusion, right? The big sleight of mind. Because otherwise you're going to be looking outside yourself. If you think about it, the body's senses really only look outside, right? They can kind of look within the body, but they have no function that allows them to look within the mind. So they're really just feelers for the physical world. And so they're very distracting because we're constantly getting feedback about what's going on out there. And we're getting little to no feedback. I mean, we're getting feedback, but we don't know how to interpret it about what's going on in the mind. Again, not the brain, but the mind. And so it's very confusing, right? It's very confusing. We don't know. We don't know what's actually going on most of the time. And so we're acting based on false premises. We think, I've got to kind of get the world right so that I can adequately influence my internal experience and get that the way that I want it. So if we're having an experience of life, the human experience that we don't like, and most people, they're kind of struggling, they're suffering, they're relatively miserable, or at least it's a split, right? Happy, sad, you know, peaceful, stressed, miserable, content. If we're not enjoying the experience we're having, if it's not a wonderful experience of life, if it's not a beautiful experience of life, and you think your experience of life comes from out there, where do you think you're going to go to intervene, to address that? You're going to go out there because it looks like it's coming from out there. And it's going to be an uphill climb, right? It's going to be a struggle because that's not actually where your experience of life comes from. Now, because of our sort of habitual thinking and the trajectory nature of the mind, it's very deceiving because we have feelings. We have an internal experience that actually looks like it matches up a lot of the time to the world out there. But only because we've learned to match it up to out there. But it's not 100% reliable. Right? So there's cracks in it. And that is evidence against the causal link. Right? Now, what happens when we begin to understand that we are minds, our experience of life is taking place within the mind, and it informs all of our decisions, it informs all of our behavior, it creates our feelings, our emotions, we understand that we have a more useful direction to look in. Right? We can begin to say, hang on a sec. I know my mind can play tricks on me. I know that it looks an awful lot like my experience of life is coming at me. But I also know about illusions. I know it's not what it seems. We can begin to look within. Again, not what the body's senses. Those can only look out there. We can say, I don't know where to look, but I'd like to look within the mind. And then you can begin to look with the mind's eye. And if you don't know how to do that, that's okay. There's a learning curve to that. Just look where you don't know where to look, which is, what one of my mentors, Michael Neal, says. Look where you don't know where to look. And you'll begin to observe some things. You'll begin to see some truths to the human experience. One is, it's 100% in the mind. Right? No exceptions. That's a big one. That's a big hurdle for most people to get over. But the more you look, the more you see it's true. The more all the evidence you've built up against that begins to tumble. Say, oh, well, that one doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and that one doesn't hold up to scrutiny, and gosh, that situation over there where I always used to feel stressed, I feel kind of at peace. How's that possible? That situation where I always used to get in an argument with my spouse, we kind of have a meaningful conversation now, and it goes really well. All of those pieces of evidence that we've acquired, we've amassed against the truth begins to just knock them over, just like dominoes. Another thing we begin to notice, there are some things we can rely on consistently about the human experience, which not only is it internal, but it's this passing thing. It's this transitory, subjective, arbitrary thing. This too shall pass. It's true for everything out there. It's true for everything in the mind as well, except the building blocks that create our experience. Those we can rely on, and that's why we call them principles. The three principles: mind, consciousness, and thought. Now there's something else about the mind that in my estimation is the most important. It's the mind. It has a ground floor. It has a foundation, if you will. And that foundation is made of love. It's made of a deep and profound sense of peace and well-being and serenity. All words that don't do it justice, right? As is true for any spiritual truth. It's the mind. It's not just the human mind. It's the mind of God. It's a spiritual source we're all hooked up to. It's a collective mind. And really what's going on most of the time is we, because of our free will to think and believe anything about ourselves or about the world, we're taught to interfere with that spiritual foundation. Now we can't eradicate it, right? Because it's the ground floor. You can't get rid of it. Can't damage it even. But we can obscure it. We can obscure it with thought. beliefs and opinions and judgments, all other words for thought, our good ideas about the world, the shoulds and the shouldn'ts, the ought-tos and the ought-not-tos. This person needs to do that, doesn't need to do this. How dare they do this to me? You know, all of our personal thinking that we invest in, and we don't even know that we're doing it, right? Because we don't think we have any control over our experience, and we don't really in the control sense. But we don't even know it's being created within our mind. We think we're victims of the world at large. But the truth is, once we see the only thing that can keep us from the peace of God is us. Our investment in our thinking. That's it. And as we begin to see that's the only thing that can keep us from it, we stop investing in it naturally, all by itself. We begin to let go. And then we return home. So that's it for today's video. Again, if you want to learn more about me or my work, check out other videos like this one, articles, learn about my one-on-one coaching or my speaking. Check me out at www.coachtylerthurman.blogspot.com, and I look forward to seeing you there. And until next time, all the love in the world. Take care.